welcome everybody. I am super excited to welcome Rebecca to talk about her book. I don't think she needs any introduction because you're all here because you know she is a professor at Harvard Business School, has worked with numerous companies and organizations for years in order to promote this transformational agenda. I have a ton of questions for her. I hope you have too. And yeah, thank you for joining us, Rebecca. Just clarify where you are for everybody so we can hear your voice as well.
Louise, I'm in southern New Hampshire. I'm a professor at Harvard University, and we have a writing retreat up north where it is quite gorgeous, may I say. So I'm very fortunate to be in New England in the fall right now.
That's perfect. Yes, Britain, I can tell you, is not very gorgeous in autumn at this point. It's just very grey and rainy. But I know there are people logging in from other places, so hopefully you've got as beautiful weather as Rebecca does. So to kick us off, we'll get around lots of different topics because this book, and I've done it again, I've kind of filled it with post-its, things that I was trying to find things I disagree with. There aren't that many, but there are things I'd like to dig into, so I hope you're up for that, because this is such important work, how we drive action. And that's what I was going to ask you, first of all, just to talk a little bit about how do we overcome what sometimes can feel like overwhelm, that there's this systems change. How do we deal with that? And I just wanted a couple of minutes, and maybe you want to go into some of the book as well, but on what's the action? How do we overcome that, and what should we do?
I love that that's your first question, Louise. So this book grows out of a course I've been teaching at the Harvard Business School for the last 10 years called Reimagining Capitalism, Business and the Big Problems. And I started teaching the class to answer your question because I had no idea of the answer. I could see that the world was in a really bad place, as I guess we all can. I was particularly focused on climate change, but the students told me that no, we had to talk about inequality as well, that the two massive systemic problems facing the world, and there are many, but the first is the fact that we are really not addressing our climate problems, and the second is we're really not focusing on inequality and all the problems that that's creating. And I had an intuition, and the 28 students who showed up for the first class had an intuition that maybe business could help. But we didn't know, and I didn't know. And so I've been teaching the course for 10 years now. It's gone from 28 students to over 300, which is nearly a third of the second year class at Harvard. And the dean has asked me to take the material into the first year required course in leadership and ethics. So I'm now running that. I'm now running that course, which is super exciting. Yeah, it's the most successful course launched at Harvard in the last 10 years. So that's exciting. Over that time, I think I developed an answer to your question. And the reason I'm giving all this preamble is it's 288 pages.
Yeah.
So I will give you the 2-minute answer, but just to give you a sense that this to me is the big question, is how do we shift the system, particularly if we take a business point of view, and particularly since we're all individuals, and what can we do? And so, here's the theory, and it's just a theory. So step one, recast how we think about the purpose of the firm. Broaden it from, it's just about making money to solving social problems productively, which is Colin Mayer's definition, but I really like. So that is the purpose of business. And while we need to make money and satisfy our investors, that's a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. That purpose releases the kind of vision, creativity, and commitment that enables us to truly create shared value, or to find opportunities where business can do the right thing and make money at scale. And so a huge part of this is the kind of individual business models that I suspect many people on this call know more about than I do, and I think is critically important. Why is it so important? Because it demonstrates different business models are possible. It can tip entire industries into new ways of behaving. It can change the whole cultural conversation around how we think about these problems. But it is clearly not enough. So if we have businesses acting from purpose, then we need collective action. So we need every firm in the industry or every firm in the region to sign up so that all of us address the problem together and we raise the floor for everyone. But collective action is often unstable and difficult to sustain. So we need enforcers. If I'm doing this in 2 minutes, we need enforcers of collective action, two potential enforcers, the capital markets and government. And at root, I believe that if we're going to solve the problems we face, we will not do it without reimagining the balance between business, government, and civil society. That in many parts of the world, government has been allowed to degenerate, has been denigrated. We put so much weight on the free market. We've forgotten that we need a strong, vigorous democracy and appropriate regulation and a strong civil society to support that democracy. So we need to rediscover that balance. And I think business can play a significant role in doing that, depending on the location. But I think there's a lot of business people behaving, let's say, badly, funding climate denial, continuing to run down government, fighting against needed regulation. We need to stop that behavior. But I think business can also play a positive role by standing up for this new social contract, which is essentially where I think we need to go. And I think purpose-driven firms can play a major role in doing that. I haven't talked about NGOs. We could talk about how important the third sector is in supporting this transformation. I don't think business can do it alone. We need also massive political and social change if we're going to really rebalance our societies. But I do think that a fraction of business that was purpose-driven, that was focused on shared value, that had the vision of rebalancing our society in the service of a capitalism that is just and sustainable and in service to all, I think it can be done. So I wrote the book as kind of a roadmap, because none of us can do more than a tiny piece of any of this.
Well, this is it, right?
Yeah, right.
That's fantastic. Thank you. That was a whole book in two minutes. That's brilliant. Thank you. And some of that I want to come back into. One of the things that particularly struck me was this balance between government and business. So I want to come back to that a little bit. I'll jump into something else first, though, because I think nobody else but me is going to ask, and then we'll get to other people's questions too. And you answered the sort of why did you start the course originally brilliantly, and I love that it's grown and it's now compulsory, because that's what we need, right? That it shouldn't be an option anymore to think about these things. Do you think, and I know you teach at Harvard University, do you still think that I want to say the Harvard types and maybe even the Harvard Business School types, are they still the leaders that we should be, that we think they're going to be in the next 10, 20 years, as they have kind of dominated for quite a while?
So a less polite version of your question, Louise, is wait. You're expecting white straight men to save us? Like really? Surely change has to come from elsewhere. And so let me say yes. Do I think that Harvard graduates can save the world? Certainly not alone.
No.
Do I think it's helpful to have the Harvard Business School community thinking about these issues and at least exposed to these questions, at least grappling with these issues? I do, because absolutely, the CEOs of the world's largest companies, with some important exceptions, are not going to wake up one morning and go, oh my God, justice and sustainability, got to do it. But is it really important to change the conversation so that a large number of people are saying it's not about maximizing shareholder value anymore? It really isn't. You should learn about this stakeholder capitalism stuff. You should learn about this ESG. There's really a different way to do. And in many ways, I wrote the book for that community to say, if you believe in the fundamental normative commitments of capitalism to freedom and prosperity, you should care about this stuff. And this is not some crazy tree-hugging agenda, although I clearly am a crazy tree-hugger, but that it is a mainstream, if you care about the economy and you care about the long term, you should focus on these issues. And so I think to the degree that we can make parts of that community allies, that's important. To the degree that we can make really bad behavior socially unacceptable, I think that's super important. So yeah, this is just a part of the puzzle. What I'm doing, I think of as what I can do given where I sit. Is it enough? No, of course not.
Right. Yeah, no, agreed. And I think it was David Attenborough who recently said, we have all the knowledge, we know everything. Now it's the communication challenge that's coming at us. And it's sort of right. We have the tech, we have the data, we know what we need to do. It's now just getting those narrative out, both to the Harvard community and to the others. So I'm really grateful that you've wrote the book, whether it's for them only or for the rest of us too. It's nice. Thank you. One more thing on kind of the personal side, because I love that you take the time to reveal both your tree hugging nature, but also some quite personal pieces of your story in the book. And one thing that's been very much on my mind, and particularly with the, sort of everybody working from home during Corona lockdowns all over the world, has been whether we need to break down the silos between professional and personal, I want to say personalities, in order to make these shifts. Is it an essential part that a CEO comes to work and remembers that he's a dad and a tree hugger or a cyclist or whatever he is? I'm going to say he because he is. Is there something about that's a shift that also needs to happen? Because 10 years ago when I started, you certainly did, or 10, 20, 30 years ago, you certainly didn't take your personal life to work ever. And that seems to have shifted. Is that a good thing? What do you think?
That's a really deep question. One of my closest friends is furious that I wrote the book I did, because he thinks, and he runs a major billion-dollar corporation, he thinks that this shift is absolutely fundamental, and that what I'm calling for, in fact, is a shift in how we show up at work and how we conceive of our role as business people. And I do believe that. I just published a piece in Daedalus, which is up on the web for free if anyone wants to have a look at it, called Climate in the Boardroom: Struggling to Reconcile Business as Usual and the End of the World as We Know It. And the piece is about my personal journey, which is, on the one hand, the world is falling apart and I just want to scream. And on the other, no, we're in the boardroom. We've got to use that language. I've got to stay cool, calm, and collected. And in fact, I'm fresh off a Millikan conference panel, 4,000 people watching, me, two major CEOs and Raju Ragan, and they are ultra calm. And I'm getting like more and more incandescent as the panel goes on, like, no, business is pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into climate denial. It's not just a minor thing that will be rebalanced with the election. And then, and I think on the one hand, I'm creating interest, but on the other, am I a hysterical female who doesn't understand how the game is played? And so I think it's very, very, holding this tension is something my guess is everyone on this call grapples with. What I really believe is that we have to shift. That we've got this crazy, like, well, yes, I have to keep burning coal. Of course, the planet is burning and my children are yelling at me, but hey, it's maximizing my profits. It's just
insane, isn't it? The schizophrenia.
It's just insane. So I do think it's absolutely central. And, I think that those companies that do manage to release that kind of energy do have access to a kind of level of passion and commitment that other firms don't have. But it's tricky in today's world, and many business people can't really do that.
It's sort of being constrained. We do some work with a small company called Board Intelligence, and who help with software, provide board papers and so on, and set the agenda. And one of the things they've done, I believe recently, is put in analytics. So as a board member, you can see, what are you spending your time talking about? Exactly.
Seriously?
Yeah, because if you're always signing off insurance papers or what, something not important, but fairly operational, rather than discussing transformation, climate change, strategy, then you should know about it. So I think it's moving in that way. And I can tell you more about them offline probably. Okay. So I just suddenly, a couple of great questions have popped up now I'm going to jump to, which one from Paul Haney about, is it then as much about reimagining leadership as it is capitalism? And you part answered it, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity to lean into that more, if there's more to be said about new leadership. A lot of people talk about yin and yang, or we're coming out of the era of masculine leadership into more feminine values. And I personally can see it both ways. And I love that lots of the leaders who've done well through this COVID crisis are female, but I'm not sure we can afford to say that only half the planet can now be leaders. Thank you very much. I think we have to expand it. I'd love to hear thoughts on reimagining leadership.
So I'm an engineer and an economist. What do I know about leadership? What I can say is, in working with firms in this area for the last 15 years, what I think I see is the leaders who succeed are almost schizophrenic in running exactly this divide. On the one hand, they are totally focused on the bottom line and really thinking about the business model and operational excellence. And on the other, they're extremely visionary, deeply empathic, and totally values rooted. And it seems to us that it seems to me that our challenge going forward is to help people do both. And that's hard, right? I mean, I tell the students, you don't get to crash the company. You have to be a better business person if you're going to do this, but you also have to be absolutely authentic and present and willing to do the emotional work. And I think most of us, and this is where my ignorance is going to show, is most of us have a personal style, which might be one or the other, and really being able to move freely between both is tricky. But I do think that's the direction we have to go. So, Paul, yes, I think it's absolutely about reimagining leadership. And another really important aspect of reimagining leadership, forgive me, is it's not just about managing your firm. It's about thinking about the ecosystem in which you're located, thinking about the institutions of which you're a part. Business has, for the last 50 years, been able to say, don't bug me, I put my head down, I maximize profits, I maximize social welfare. That's clearly not true from a matter of economic theory and what's actually happened in the world. But we really need to train leaders who can look out and engage with the broader world in productive, effective ways. And that's another whole set of skills.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I don't think that trickiness is ever going to go away. I think one of the things we're going to have to just be content with is we can't master that. Thank you very much. There will always be that tension somehow, that it's messy, and you'll go one direction and then the other, because you have to make sure you don't crash the company whilst engaging and doing other things. You have to be internally focused while collaborating outwardly and taking care of the ecosystem. Thank you. You talked about what we need to teach, and one of the things you say towards the end of the book, which again I kind of identified with, I'm really sorry, we're not going to disagree with much, which is around that one of the roots of this problem is fear and separateness. And and so answer is confidence and connectedness, obviously. And there's a trend that we're beginning to see, at least in this whole purpose thing. It's the purpose of a company, but also personal purpose, and leaders needing to find their personal purpose. I know Carsten, who's on the line, is really a great proponent of that, particularly, as am I. But should we really be kind of teaching not just how to find your personal purpose, but how to be confident? And they may not be the same thing, or how to be connected both to others but also to nature. Slightly theoretical question.
No, it's just a super hard question. And I'm going to answer very personally. Those of you who have been exposed to Buddhist teaching or are Buddhists will know that fear and separateness are absolutely crucial concepts in the teaching. And so they're crucial concepts for me and for how I think about this. And so at the personal level, and again, this is super personal, I don't want to generalize it, don't know if it works for anyone else.
That's why you're here.
Yeah.
What you?
But just for me, really coming to believe and live the idea that I'm just a song that the universe is singing. I'm just an energy pattern. You know, my perception of separateness is fundamentally a mistake. And it's not just like a religious teaching or a dogma, it is a physical fact that I am an integral part of the universe. I came from it and will go back to it. And the fact that I seem to perceive a boundary is merely a perceptual error. So, you know, for me, that's a huge part of it. And then the fear thing is all about protecting, again, this is for me, that little thing. Like, I'm worried, like, did I make a mess on the panel I just left? Will I ever get invited back to the big boys? You know, so I've got this whole fear script going in my head. And, you know, what's going to happen in the future? And then death. Oh my God, you know, I'm going to leave the party. And I think, you know, I talk in the book, not as much as I should, about the fact that so much of our existing structures of capitalism reinforce a focus on me right now. And so much of our consumerist culture, I think, does that too. And the big challenge is like us and later. So, you know, if you ask me in a forum like this, I'm like, I think personal transformation is so important. You know, I don't know how to write or think about it. It's not my thing, but, you know, I'm really good friends with a number of people that's what they do, you know. So Carol Sanford or others, you know, no, it's all about individual transformation. I don't know how to do it, but I think it's central, and I don't think it's enough. So I'm still the engineer and the economist. We have to change the institutions. We have to change the incentives. We have to keep talking about the business case, not only because there are a lot of people who get completely creeped out when you start this kind of conversation, who are so well guarded against it, they just don't want to go there. But also because I'm a believer in its culture and institutions, its individual transformation and social context. And you have to be continually working that interaction.
Brilliant answer. Thank you. Great. I think that's more on the personal side. I'll pause for now. We'll go a little bit deeper, I guess, on some of the other pieces. Actually, I'll pick one from John, because John, as a team, we had a discussion earlier, and I asked them to give me some questions, and John was sent me a note. John Elkington, this is, by the way, with so many different re's in pursuit of capitalism: reimagine, reinvent, rethink. Is there a danger that the agenda is going to disappear under a welter of competing brands? So, light a touch.
Well, John, you know, I have a PR firm, I have a media consultant. I mean, not all at once, and they kept wanting me to get it your thing, Rebecca, get it your, I'm like, no, really, I don't care if we call it renewing capitalism, reimagining capitalism, throwing capitalism out the window. I think, and that's my sense of the conversations, is no one is getting stuck on particular brands, is people just want to find a new way. Really, that's what they want. And they want two things. One, they want to see that there is a pathway to systemic transformation. Yeah. There's a lot of despair out there.
Yes.
And I think the pandemic has accelerated that in some ways. So they want to know that there is a path. And then they want to know, like what am I going to do? Like, really? I'm sitting here and all I do is stare into a computer all day.
How is it changing anything? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, how can we change anything? So no, I'm not too worried about the plethora of brands. And it's one of the reasons, I mean, I think I did it in this talk. I use Colin Meyer's definition of purpose. I think it's great. Yeah. You know, and he really has a fantastic way to think about it. And I think all of us in this space should be just stealing and borrowing and crediting and doing everything we can to just move us forward.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think, otherwise we're in trouble, right? If we're still seeing ourselves as separate rather than as part.
Right. That separateness thing.
Yeah, back to that again. Right, I'm going to get, so you touched on it in your introduction, and I'm really interested in this, I want to call it the balance between governments and companies. And there's so many things I can ask. So I've got two bits to ask you around it. One is about, it seems that governments have come into a bit of strength now, partly because the virus, the pandemic, has kind of been a bit of an emergency drill where suddenly have all looked to governments for the first time in a long time to make some changes. Not all of them have done very well in handling it, but is that do you think that is a more permanent shift that needs to happen? So governments need to step in more. You mentioned that, so maybe you've answered it already. Or is it just a little bit of a pendulum swinging? So that's my one question. And being Danish, I always think of, well, governments are quite involved in Scandinavia in a very different way than having lived here in the UK for many years than they are here. But is it just that there needs to be this acceptance of more governmental power also over businesses?
Yes, absolutely yes. And now I'm embarrassed that you read my caricature of Danish history, you know, everything you know about Denmark in 3 pages. But I think one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that it has reminded people that government is absolutely essential, that there are real public goods problems that markets genuinely cannot solve. And the correlation between the death rates and the degree to which government was able to step up and had legitimate authority and was focused on public health is so striking. So I think it's opened the conversation about government in a way that was quite different 6 months or a year ago. I mean, 6 months ago, when I was talking to groups of business people, and I would say, you know, the ultimate solution is to rebalance capitalism so that we give more power to government and strengthen democracy. People would look at me and go, well, that's a really interesting idea, Rebecca. You know, but now everybody goes, oh yeah, I always thought that. Absolutely. I mean, and we need a price for carbon. I'm not making this up. We need a price for carbon and we need to rediscover regulation. I'm thinking like, whoa, what happened? And I think what happened is the pandemic. And I think climate change too, because we cannot solve climate change without public action. And it's getting so dire, and I think getting more tangibly dire, that it's really focusing attention on the public sphere again.
And then, so a slightly follow-up question to that is, do we think they're up for the job? And I say that knowing that I think my friend Terry Ahern from the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency is on the on the call. But is the public sector in general, and this is of course, and how might we, if we are in business or if we are NGOs, how might we help them?
One of the biggest shifts over the last 20 to 30 years is the decline in trust and respect of governments. And at least in the US, and I think partly in the UK, and I'm again a bit nervous because I'm talking to lots of people who know this more than I do, there's been a sustained assault on government. And, you know, salaries haven't gone up. In the US, you know, what are the 10 worst words in the English language? I'm from government and I'm here to help. Let's just drown government in the bathtub. And so we've had systematic adverse selection. Do the best and the brightest go into government? Some absolutely still do. But you have to look at taking what, a third the salary, a quarter the salary, and then working in an environment which hasn't been getting the resources or the respect or the support it needs. So I mean no disrespect to anyone who's in government now, because I know many people who are, and they work so hard and accomplish so many things with so little. But oh my goodness, we're forcing them to run with weights on their feet. And so I absolutely think that one of the things that business should be pushing for, in addition to strengthening democracy, is strengthening government capacity. And really, you know, let's think about a brilliant civil service, and let's think about transparency, and let's think about giving government modern day tools.
One of the conclusions we had out of our kind of Tomorrow's Capitalism inquiry, which you touch on interestingly in the book, similar themes of course, is this idea that businesses need to become activists and step out of their silos, but engage with lots of different stakeholders, but also with government. And then I get scared because we've put that out and like, yes, all businesses should be activists, and the lovely Lisa Kinga from the UNGC then repeated it a couple of times, and I'm like, but we've seen that lobbying and interactions between business and government hasn't exactly been sort of what I would consider positive in terms of the results over the past decades. So do we need, and how does that look? Business to, on one hand, weigh in, but at the same time give up that power. And you talked about giving up power for government, but another messy situation, another bit of tension of how do you become activist and yet give government more. Is it? Yeah.
So this to me seems like the hardest question.
Sorry.
So, you know, I'm going to have to read tomorrow's Capitalism, which I should have done before the call.
No,
Apologies.
No.
To see how you thought about this. But so a couple of thoughts. One, I think business should be active in civics, not politics.
Interesting.
So that means focusing on the health of the institutions. Strong independent media, strong independent judiciary. I really mean it about the democracy.
Yeah.
I think here in the US, business should be stepping up in the states where they're active and saying voter suppression, that long term is going to destroy everything that on which we rely. You know, gerrymandering, it's un-American, and most importantly, it's really bad for economic growth. You know, that we have to have a strong democracy, and we need to lobby to get money out of politics. So paradoxically, I'm asking business to use their power and their lobbying ability to get themselves out of the day-to-day heavily money-driven lobbying that's going on. Now, suppose we did that. Suppose we had a really strong democracy and really strong government. Then business would still have an important role to play in, let's call it, I don't know the right word, classical lobbying, which is the provision of information, being part of the public debate, engaging on questions of the day. Business has a lot to say. It's really important that their voice is heard, but all within this broader context of a partner to civil society and government. And this is one of the reasons I think that our earlier conversations about focusing on purpose and personal transformation is so important, is in my dreams, there's a strong norm against mucking things up. So I think, for example, that actively funding climate denial when you know it's real and your scientists are telling you it's going to open the Arctic and how great that is going to be for drilling, that should be as morally unacceptable as using child labor. You know, that there are some things business shouldn't do. And that, I think, includes lobbying to get the rules of the game in your industry changed so that you can make huge amounts of money and consumers lose out. You know, so, but here I'm going to ask you, is that what Denmark is like? Are those real conversations constrained by a shared sense of the common good?
I'm just going to check the attendee list again and check there are no Danes who are actually living in Denmark right now. I think there might be, because I have lived in the UK for a long time. But that is how a lot of it is set up, that consultations happen all the time on where business and unions and other sort of parties come together to help advise the government on what's the practical thing of doing this in a very different way than I've ever seen here. But so
that's what I have in mind as at least a starting point.
Good. Yeah, no, I'm always very careful, because having been out of Denmark for 20 odd years, going back all the time, but yeah, I think it's changed. Now we've got more questions coming in. I'm just going to jump a little bit. I saw Stephen saying to change the rules in the game must their skin be in the game? So so must there be an upside for acting correctly and a downside for acting incorrectly?
Absolutely. My vision, at least, is that purpose might get the flywheel of change going, and a few businesses out in front catalyzing new ways to behave is critical, but that we won't get where we're going until we change the rules so that doing the right thing is rewarded and doing the bad thing is not. I mean, we clearly need carbon regulation. We clearly need changes in workplace regulation, because there will be always groups of firms who look for the quick way, the short way, the cheap way.
Yeah, no, of course.
Louise, could I address Tina's question about trust?
Please do.
And the root causes of trust deficits. The reason I wanted to talk about it is that my scholarly work is actually focused on trust. Okay. And the reason I got interested in purpose in the first place is that I was working with a lot of firms that were trying to change. And it seemed to me that the single thing that made the difference was that it was the firms that were emotionally committed to change, to transformation, that succeeded in doing it. And yes, some other things had to be in place, but fundamentally, you had to have a commitment that was more than profits.
Yep.
And there was nothing in economics that said that this should be important, that the purpose of the firm and having an authentic sense of shared meaning should like make a systemic difference in the macroeconomy, like nothing. Tons of work, of course, in psychology and organizational behavior and organizational theory and social psychology, but in economics, nothing. So I started working with some colleagues on, why is it that these high road firms, these high trust firms, seem to be able to do so much better? And what is it? What is trust? And so the economists were not thinking about trust because they thought of it as the rational outcome of a multiplayer game. So let's think about General Motors and the union. General Motors sees that Toyota is running a very high trust work system where they're really working closely with their employees in sort of deep authenticity and shared values. And so to an economist, that would be like, oh, okay, so all you have to do is announce to your workforce that we're going to invest in them and treat you with dignity and respect and keep our word and performance will improve. So check, let's just do it. And as soon as you say that, you're like, no.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of my career actually working with General Motors and they tried and it didn't work. So the question that Tina, that you're asking is, should more work be done to address like where do trust deficits come from and how do we rebuild them? I think, that's what I tell my graduate students is the most important problem we need to understand, both inside organizations. And of course, there's more work done socially in social capital and social trust, but I think inside organizations, which is, I'm sure many of you on this call are committed to building purpose-driven, values-driven organization. And you show up and say, here's the future, but you don't do that because you're more skilled than that. But if you do that, like nothing happens. There's a grinding noise. Yeah. How do we build trust over time? What helps? What doesn't? Can we give a playbook to firms? And if anyone on this call has like a playbook, could you send it to me, please? Because it's the single biggest question I get asked most often. I don't know the answer, which is, okay, I'm running a conventional firm. I've decided I want to change it. What do I do? And I mumble and make referrals. But as a scholar, I would love to understand, like, how is that done?
So I'm going to make one little pitch, or not pitch, but it's one of the things that we've started working on. And the reason why Carsten, who's our new board member, is on this is he's been leading big companies in digital transformation over decades. And we're looking at, are there lessons from that that can help this kind of transformation happen?
And I think we have the basics, be consistent, follow through, have a clear vision. I mean, it's not that we know nothing, but there's so much subtlety about when this works and when it doesn't work.
And probably, there needs to be frameworks rather than prescription, because whilst humans are similar and organizations can be similar, they're all different, right?
And maybe we need novels, that kind of give a sense of the human reality and the human dynamics of what that looks like on the ground.
That's a really interesting call. I'm going to turn us to finance, because there's lots of questions, both in the chat, but also some of the ones I was sent in earlier. And I want to pick on Greg. That's all right. So the question, I'm going to read it out because it's a little bit long, is to rewire finance, does more work need to be done to highlight the uncertainties and theoretical weaknesses in the models used in orthodox finance and economics, such as capital asset pricing model, in order to allow new methods and types of impact data to be used with equal authority? Is Harvard Business School seeking to catalyze this theoretical critique?
So yes and no. Many of my colleagues are working on the theoretical critique in accounting.
Okay.
So the name that perhaps people have heard of is George Seraphim, who helped fund the Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative, but he has many colleagues. And the idea that the financial accounts do not give you an accurate picture of either the current state or possible future of the corporation and why that might be and what the alternatives might be, lots of work. In finance, not that I know of. It would seem to me, just knowing the basics, that of course there are serious implications. I have finance who are all over the risk models are wrong. And we need to think about the relationship between risk and portfolio construction in very different kinds of ways. So there's a lot of work going on in that area. But otherwise, and this may be my ignorance, finance is not my field. I know enough to be dangerous. But as far as I know, tons of work in accounting, less in finance. I mean, the finance faculty are still the keepers of the flame, the old flame.
Okay.
They really are.
That's really interesting. And what's going to move them, do you think?
Oh, I wish I knew. I do panels with them, and I say, climate change, inequality, collapse of democracy. And they say, well, cumulative economic growth has brought billions of people out of poverty. And if these problems, government should fix it. I say, but business has corrupted government. Not really. And you don't want government to be business involved in government. So don't say that. Just fix the political system and we'll be fine.
Interesting.
So I wrote a case on Papua New Guinea and a firm in Papua New Guinea. I said, okay, so if you're in Papua New Guinea where there is essentially no government, do you have more responsibility there? Well, I don't know. I'll have to think about that. It's super tough. I think it's close to a religion. And they're holding so tight to the null, and they're afraid that people like me will shift the system in ways that destroy the fundamental drivers of economic growth. So I do a lot of panels on stakeholder versus shareholder, and we spend the first 15 minutes on, yes, the raw form of stakeholder governance is a bad idea. Could we now have a more interesting conversation? Because I think there's a real concern that will create agency problems at all the firms, that there'll be no clear measurement, that we'll hand these problems over to business when it shouldn't be business, it should be government. So there's a lot of legitimate concerns that I think we have to grapple with. Sorry, that was kind of a rambling response.
No, that was interesting. And just following on slightly from that. So in terms of, and you can just say pass on those, in terms of giving new ways of giving investors sort of better data, are you seeing any better data models that will kind of create more sort of the greatest exponential change if we do something different on that?
So I'm really torn on this. So first, yes, I think there is much better data and it's coming. My colleague, Professor Seraphim, has just put up on the website of the Impact Weighted Accounts Initiative, data on impact for 1,800 large firms. And this is just a first pass, but they find, for example, that for a third of the firms in their sample, the environmental damage they're causing is greater than their entire profits. Yeah. And for another third, it's greater than 25% of their profits. I mean, the figures are so startlingly high that I think they will begin to change at least the conversation and behavior. And he would be the first to say, it's just the first run through and there are error bars on these numbers, but we're sure it's enormous. Yeah. And the difference between firms is huge. And firms within the same industry, which is really interesting. And so, yes, I do think better data is coming. And I think there's real demand for it. Again, this is where I'm torn. Wealth is now so concentrated. And the management of wealth is so concentrated, and so much of it's in passive funds or index funds, that the big systemic risks we face, unchecked climate change, unchecked inequality, institutional degradation, are risks to the long-term returns of the world's investors. And so in my book, I talk about Hiro Mizuno at the Japanese pension fund, 1.7 trillion in assets, 1% of the world's equity He has to hold most of his money in passive funds. He cannot diversify away from the risk of climate change.
No.
He came to believe that it was his fiduciary duty to try and address climate change and social inclusion, that these were the two major brakes on economic growth, and he had to really work on them. And of course, there's a collective action problem, but the kind of good news is wealth is so concentrated, one could imagine solving the collective action problem. You know, I'm told there's a room where 15 people get together and they're managing like 40% of the world's assets. Well, that's super creepy.
Yes.
Good news is, you know, if they wanted to really make a dent against climate change, they really could.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that might be where this better data goes. Once we have good data on the costs of treating your workers like commodities, not giving decent benefits and so on, once we have better data, maybe we'll trigger more investor action, and that would be fantastic. I mean, it would also support, of course, deeper engagement by employees, customers, and government. So all kinds of reasons to want to see that data.
Brilliant, thank you. All right, I'm now leaning to a variety of questions, and I think we're going to go to Paul's, the one who sent in advance, Paul. So it says, and there's another one from, I think, Thomas, that we'll follow up with. In the book, the discussion and quantitative calculation of the costs incurred for treating carbon emissions as externality in our previous reimagining of free market economics, I found made for compelling reading. In our modern day efforts to reimagine capitalism, how do we best mitigate against the possible negative effects of externalities relating to modern day phenomena, e.g. Mental health effects due to surveillance-centric business models, races to the bottom generated by digital legislation lagging behind the rapid advancements in digital technology, etc. So a whole new set of externalities.
It's a whole new set of externalities that business is throwing off. And I think, you know, the focus, the two that really keep me up at night, one is surveillance. Mm-hmm. So business can now be watching our every move, and we can be required to wear something on our wrist that is transmitting our emotional, you know, all our health data. So they know our emotional states, whether we're angry or anxious. And so you can see all kinds of potential problems with that kind of data. And then AI and robotics. Yeah. I mean, this is a huge transformation. It's coming very fast. And I don't think we know what to do with it at all. I think these externalities need both business solutions and government solutions. Mm-hmm. And that in both cases, we have, God, this is such a level of generality, my apologies, but the mass of us are going to suffer, and the people in charge think these things are just great. To a first approximation, you know, whether you're putting up a surveillance state in China or you're, you know, running a 200,000 employee company, and finally you can really get data on every employee and what they're doing and every keystroke. So I think the solutions are the old-fashioned solutions. I'm going to sound like a broken wheel. The balance between business, government, and civil society. I think it's the only way we've found. Is if you give all the power to government, you get authoritarianism or autocracy. If you give all the power to business, you get crony capitalism and a large part of the mess we're in now. All the power to civil society, and you get sort of the worst kind of civil society, you get populism. So the balance between the three, and it's not a kumbaya I'm talking about. No. It's not like everyone holds hands and sings songs. It's we hold each other in check. So, you know, one of my friends said, you should rename your book, Rebecca. It's not Reimagining Capitalism. It's let's go back to the capitalism we had in the 50s and 60s, only without the misogyny and the racism. And, you know, because that, and Galbraith's concept of countervailing power. Yeah. That holding each other in check. I mean, we clearly need to improve labor representation. You know, a voice for labor is when you go back through the history and you look at the statistics, it's so clearly correlated with lower inequality and more broadly with policies that are for everyone. Not that unions are always perfect, not that there aren't issues. None of these actors is perfect, but you need the balance, and we've lost sight of the importance of that balance. Yeah. And I think surveillance and AI will just make it even more important.
No, I agree. The example I normally use, sort of microing it down, is that you need tension for perfect teams to work. And in a company, that's why you don't have the marketing director also be in charge of the finances, because marketing should be dreaming big and spending lots of money, or want to spend lots of money. Hello, cat. And the finance person is in charge of keeping a check of that. And you need to have the respect between the parties and the acknowledgement of what is the role, and whether it's marketing and finance or government and business and unions.
Oh, Louise, that's brilliant. I've been talking about this for 6 months and I haven't thought to use that analogy.
Oh, bless you.
But you're exactly right. It's like you're marketing and I'm finance. And, we have stereotypes of each other, and the marketing people hate the finance people and vice versa. But we got to respect each other. We got to work together. We got to both be firing to make this whole firm work. I love that. Yes, exactly. Thank
Fantastic.
you.
Now there's a bunch of questions and I'm looking at it, and I think Thomas's was about externalities. Thomas, I'm just having a quick look. So Thomas Lingard. So it says, some focus on unpriced externalities again, that progressive businesses can start to build into their thinking, and solutions such as advocating for carbon pricing are really important parts of that solution. But the accumulated wealth that's been generated in the past through social and environmentally extractive activities is now highly concentrated. You've talked to this, and that inequality is fueling the dysfunction of democracy. To what extent do you think that wealth taxation will need to be an important part of that system's reset? And do you think companies can play any part in advocating for that? And I'll give you one thing, and Thomas is obviously here himself, but he works for Unilever. I'm just going to give you that. So he's a big company. Hopefully he's thinking about advocating for wealth taxation.
I think a wealth tax is a huge part of the solution. It's most obvious in the case of inherited wealth, where it's very hard to argue that, the people in question, worked hard, built businesses, deserved it, were motivated by being able to have all this wealth to do anything. Mm-hmm. The Walton heirs collectively control more money than the bottom half of the US population. The Zuckerbergs and the Bezoses, we're going to have dynasties of aristocrats if we're not careful. And we know that, your first billion gets you immediate access to any politician you want. That's just the way the world works. My colleague, Larry Lindsay, who says, we have a republic of, what's your number? 56 people? And yes, there are lots of Democratic billionaires and they spend, but I don't think any billionaires should be spending enormous amounts of money on our politics. So I'm a huge fan of a wealth tax. Whether business can help, you're asking a very tough question. I could imagine business people saying, let's think about inheritance tax. Let's think about a threshold beyond which, more money is not motivating to anyone. To me, I think, well, how much money do you need to be motivated? I mean, is your first billion enough? Will you work harder if you think you can make 10? I mean, we know from the data and the history that that's nonsense. That yes, you need some upside, but you don't need significant fractions of the world's GDP to be persuaded to get up in the morning. So yes, critically important issue.
Yeah, but it's a bit hard to ask. Yeah, I would say hard to ask companies to argue for that particular tax. It's a bit of a hard nut.
Yeah, that's a hard one. But they could stop opposing it. That would be good.
There we go.
Stopping opposing it would be a huge step forward.
Yes. I'm going to pick on my friend Michael Solomon, who I haven't seen for ages. He's saying, with better metrics and a higher uptake, perhaps ESG will one day allow all investors to reward good business, punish bad ones. But to create real change, we need to empower consumers and employees to play that part too. How can we do some of that? And
So people have played for a while with what one of my colleagues described to me as the pricing gun of truth. So this was a little gizmo you had in your pocket and you pointed it at a product, and on your screen would pop up, this caused this much environmental damage, this much health damage, but this company is really good on politics or whatever it was. Yeah. And you would get that data to the individual consumer. It's a compelling vision. There are, I think, two issues to think about. The first is actually doing that in reality is super hard. Some products easier than other. If you're buying coal-fired electricity, it's really easy. But, you know, more complicated products and services, it's hard. The allocation problem is difficult. Not impossible, but one could see it happening. The second problem, however, is more fundamental, which is that so far, most people won't pay more. And I wish the research looked different on this front, but my reading of the work is it's still not very different. There are demographics who will pay more. Middle-aged women of a certain income will pay more for sustainably produced products. There are products for which people will pay more. Think Tesla, think food. But most people will not pay more. And what they will do is switch. They will switch behaviors. Now, I'm a bit nervous saying this because I suspect there are several people on the call who know more about this than I do. But my understanding of the research is if you're offering the same product proposition, same price, same values, plus you're destroying the planet less and you're treating your people better, you can gain share. And that's really important. But otherwise, it's hard to get out of the niche. Now, to me, the big question is, will that shift? Will we see consumer sentiment shift sufficiently far that people will say, I know it's a nickel more, but I will pay for it? And so far, not.
They haven't, right?
Haven't done it.
And
people everywhere say they care about these issues. I mean, what I'm seeing, I'd be curious what you're seeing, Louise, is the more effective lever for change is employees.
Yeah.
It's employees that are pushing companies to change, not customers by and large.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. You know, having been through several consumer-facing, purposeful eco companies, the people say they will buy, but actually, this shift still hasn't happened. And if you look at the spending patterns of the teenagers who are on the streets, bless them, who genuinely want change, they're still also spending not exactly. And I don't think it's just to do with information, as you say. But there's some of that. I think hopefully information can get us through some of it now. Where again, chat is going crazy. You can probably see it, Rebecca. So I'm now going to
okay, and I will give you short answers.
No, it's great. No, it's fine. We've got just less than half an hour. Everybody, so Rebecca asked me at the beginning of this, she said, we can't possibly talk, you know, for an hour and a half. Would people listen? And I said, well, we'll see if the chat keeps coming. We'll definitely go for this time. So there you go. I think everybody's really appreciating your time and your thoughtfulness. So please don't give short answers.
My pleasure. These are fantastic questions. I really wish I was with you in person. It would be so much fun.
That would be fun. We'll do that when we finally can all travel. Okay. Everybody's invited, and as well as the virtuals who are from in other countries, and we'll do a part virtual, part physical. That would be wonderful. So Carsten has just put in a recent panel, someone gave the following proximities. The personal wealth is proportionate to the cost you exported as externalities. Wow. So the funds to deal with the consequences should be paid through your inheritance tax. That's
Carsten, I'm a huge fan of a massive inheritance tax, because you know, for people like us who are fortunate enough to have resources, we've already given our children an incredible start in life with a huge amount of privilege. The idea that we're then going to dump enormous amounts of money on them as well seems crazy. Plus, you're right. I mean, where did this money come from? It came from, it depends, right? But at least some of this money came from exploiting other people and strip mining the planet. So yes, huge fan of inheritance tax.
Yeah. Oh, Paul has just said after a web conference he was on, apparently the governments won't pay more either for good products. That's so depressing. Let's move on. I'm not going there. I'm picking, if it's possible to calculate the cost of an organization's profit on the planet, could it be distilled down to a profit level and then translated to the consumer? So a soft drink might cost £1.20, but if it's labeled that it will cost the planet £2.50, maybe that's more powerful.
So my colleague George Seraphim's work is trying to do this at the company level. And once we have it at the company level, in principle, you could begin to translate it at least into major product classes. And so, yes, in principle, it's possible. I doubt it will ever be perfect because there will be costs that need to be allocated across major products. Yeah. But yes, you could do it. The question is whether consumers would act on it.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's an interesting one. And Thomas has, and I'm not going to read it out, but has put an interesting sort of segmentation of different generations and who will pay for what. Baby boomers don't care. And millennials will buy, if not a worse product. Gen Z will only buy against sustainability criteria and will take performance convenience hit if they need to. Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. So I'll let everybody read it, but that's interesting. Thank you, Thomas. Now, where are we going to go next, Natalie? I'm looking at this kind of two, what have we got? I'm trying to distinguish questions from brilliant comments. It's worth having a browse through if you haven't already.
Well, how about this question about reimagining entrepreneurship?
Oh, yeah.
So here I'm probably up. So the full question is from Ipshita. Are we seeing more entrepreneurs just chasing to be tech billionaires? Are we thinking about rethinking capitalism? How can we think of rethinking entrepreneurship? What are the new role models? I'm sure this is sample selection bias, but I get at least an email a day about incredibly cool new business models. And my students, they're not thinking about being tech billionaires. Maybe 20% of the class wants to be a finance or tech billionaire, but tons of them want to have a social mission and make a difference. I have an entire file on my computer just called Cool Companies, which are these little entrepreneurial ideas. So I think that's already happening. I think, social enterprise has pros and cons as a movement, but one of its strengths is it really has focused a whole generation of people on how can I set up an entrepreneurial venture in this area that will make a difference in the world.
Yeah, no, that's great. And actually that file,
really positive.
Yeah, I should connect you with Jenny, who I work with, who's building the Green Swans Observatory, trying to focus on those exciting new both technologies and companies and business models that can kind of create an exponential change, that have that magic in them. And I think we're calling them ugly ducklings before they get to be green swans.
I would love the connection, because apart from anything else, I'd love to write cases about them. Because one of the things that changes people's mind, I see it in my teaching, is you give them one case and they go, oh, maybe. You give them 2, you give them 3, you give them 6, you give them 28. By the end, the students are going, okay, there's a business model here.
Great.
So cases are so important. Yeah.
We will definitely, I'll make that connection. And so Natalie, thank you. She's picked one from Charlie. Says, is there a role for a company-wide profit sharing to re-engage frontline workers with the purpose and wider mission of corporations? I love that question, because I personally kind of grown a little bit tired of CEOs who are just pronouncing the purpose, and then you dig in, not even very deep, and nothing is happening. And the incentive of their employees is just not there.
Right.
So
as I'm sure many people know, there's a whole movement happening around employee-owned firms or customer-owned firms, cooperatively owned firms. I think there's quite convincing data to suggest that these kinds of firms are more likely, certainly to think about worker well-being, but also to think about the social well-being of the community that they're in. I think it's a really exciting movement. And if I could wave a wand and make it easier for everyone to create these kinds of corporate structures, I really would. I think hugely important. I think that's a little different from profit sharing in a large firm. So in a very large firm, profit sharing is a form of increasing compensation. And some labor advocates are nervous about it because it's compensation at risk. And are you putting weight on people who cannot take that kind of financial risk? So that's something to think about. But there are firms where profit sharing has been accompanied by governance sharing or power sharing.
Yeah.
And that seems to me key. And the academic research I'm aware of suggests that if you have power sharing as well as profit sharing, then you can begin to see some really interesting effects on productivity and engagement and creativity. And that seems to me the winning play here is profit share and power share. And if you can do that, then I think you can really change the whole gestalt inside an organization.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I think it's in Germany, and somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, where you don't, you have both a supervisory board, but there are representatives from employees there and the unions and others.
So again, we're both talking from a distance, but Germany both has German firms above a certain size have employee representation on the supervisory board, but they also have works councils right the way through the organization, and they have unions negotiating at the industry level.
Yeah.
So you've got, at every level of the power structure, the kind of micro, meso, and macro, you've got worker representation, and seems to work pretty well. Not perfect, always bumps, but Germany's a much more equal society than many others in the developed world.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'll jump to Michael's popped a question in that's sort of similar about we'd love to hear the perspectives on the systems change policy agenda that, for example, B Lab and partners have recently put forward. I think this is Imperative 21, to advance stakeholder capitalism, starting with the US. Any comments on sort of changing the rules?
Yes, I have enormous respect for Andrew Kassoff and his colleagues in the B Lab. I think that there are B Lab companies that are doing an amazing job. I think it should be a structure that every firm considers. I think waving a wand and converting all existing governance structures into B Labs might not have the effects that we would hope for. Because for the B Lab structure to work, you have to have investors who are on board. It's a structure in which investors still retain all the power. And so I could imagine if you had a group of cynical, hard-bitten investors and you put in place a B Lab structure, they're like, yeah, whatever, we're still caring about the profits. And if we go the other way and say, okay, we take the investors away from control, and so now we're going to have maybe a board that's in charge and makes the trade-offs, then I'm a little bit worried about good old-fashioned agency costs and managerial insulation and a lot of greenwashing. In the end, I think it has to be regulations. It has to be, you just have to do the right thing. And I think purpose-driven companies play a really important role in raising the ceiling, in showing what's possible, in pointing the way towards what all firms could be doing. But in the end, we cannot rely on company action to address some of these tricky issues. Too many of them are public goods problems. Too many of them threaten the power of the managers, the power and wealth of the managers. I mean, we need fundamental shifts in workplace regulation. That's not really going to come from purpose-driven companies. And as I say, I have enormous respect. I think the movement is important, but I don't think it's a sort of overall answer to the problems we face.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. Volans is the third B Corp I've worked in. I'm hugely proud of all of them.
Right.
But there's, and I think having the examples of B Lab or B Corps and benefit corporations is important. But it's as nothing stands alone, I think, is one of the key messages.
Right. And we need more B Corps and more benefit corps. I mean, firms that are really committed in this direction, absolutely. No, it's the kind of imposition of the structure on others that makes me jumpy.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And Chris McGregor just said something. Please just send an email if you think your company's an ugly duckling. Louise@volans.com or anybody else at volans.com, and we'd love to talk to you about it for the observatory. And then a couple of questions around inequality. I'm just going to grab. One is from Roxanne, which says, how do we operate under a new capitalist system while also ensuring that equality doesn't fall to the other side, or to the wayside, not just internally in companies, but in our Western countries, but globally? How do we make sure that, so I know Roxanne, so that we don't increase the inequality between countries, I guess. And
so there's a deep question that I have not addressed, and I do not address in my book, about, how do we think about these issues in really less developed environments? So there are definitely places in the world which need to prioritize growth and over sustainability. Far too many people are still without access to clean water, basic power, sanitation. And so I wrote a book that is designed for managers in the developed world.
Mm.
I myself believe that we should be transferring technology and expertise on a massive scale to the less developed world.
Yeah.
To take the obvious example, if India decides to take, a fossil fuel route to growth, we're going to have horrible effects on the climate no matter what everyone else does. They're just so big. And so I think we have a very strong incentive to both develop the technology, which will mean building green is economic, but to give it to them. I mean, quite literally, I think we should be heavily subsidizing better modes of agriculture, clean energy. It's just so unjust because after all, we caused the climate crisis. It's the carbon we put up that created this problem.
No, and I guess some people say that the UN and other organizations like it are kind of struggling to figure out what their role is now. Maybe a platform that transfers resources and technology in the right direction could be one. I'm pleased to see, so we work at least with one sort of multinational company, a Spanish company called Acciona, and they're really looking at how can they build bridges and put in water, sanitation and so on. How can they be regenerative globally with some of those? So I'm kind of proud of that. And as much as sometimes multinationals get blamed for a lot and have caused issues with supply chains and so on, that could be a positive.
Well, there are examples in the food supply chains, right? I'm thinking of companies like Danone and Nestle and Unilever, where building a healthier supply chain has meant real investments in local governance, in local families, in local entrepreneurs. So we do have examples of major multinationals at least trying to make a difference against some of these problems in less developed environments.
No, so good stuff. There's another inequality, and it's from Nicholas. How can we resolve the tension that doing good is often just more expensive than the alternative and therefore difficult to commit to for poorer individuals, countries, and some companies? Huge swathes of the world are still in systemic poverty and have to prioritize development over sustainability, as you just said. How can we get that balance of responsibility right when we're at that point?
So the model that's in my head is the model of someone who spent 20 years studying innovation. I'm a big believer that when we put our minds to it, we will solve these problems in ways that are cost efficient. We've seen the costs of solar and wind go down faster than anyone imagined possible. I think we could see similar accelerations in sustainable and regenerative agriculture, infrastructure. I really believe this. We just need to go down the learning curve. There's the innovation is out there if we can fund it. And I think of the role as the developed world and those of us with resources in particular as pushing that curve. And if we can do that, that will mean that those who don't have these resources will never have to face the choice between building a coal plant and a solar plant. That it will just be the cheaper thing to do. And that sounds so utopian, but I think that's the outline of the way we need to think about this, is those of us who have resources need to drive the technology to make it cheap enough for others to use, and we need to subsidize where that's not the case.
No, I don't think that's utopian, actually. Maybe I'm a terrible optimist.
Maybe the two of us are off in our utopian bubble.
We'll be off on that. So I saw one from Terry. What does it say here? If a business is trying to make a major difference on the environment and inequality, it will take major innovation, so involve major risk. At the Scottish EPA, we've developed ways to share the risk and return to support business innovation. Have you seen regulators or other government actions to share that risk and return? It's Terry's question. I'm going to add one on before you answer, if that's all right, because I've been lucky enough to see Terry at work and his organization. And it seems that innovative regulators like the Scottish EPA are treading this line of having to both regulate business in a serious way, and in Scotland that's salmon farming and excellent oil platforms and so on, at the same time as trying to collaborate with them to help that innovation. So one, have you seen that risk and return sharing from anywhere? And two, what's your advice to Terry on managing that tension?
Oh,
I see him.
I'm not giving advice to Terry. He or she knows far more about this than I do. I'm just going to applaud. I am going to say I've seen it in a couple of other places. I think one interpretation of social impact bonds is that this is what they do. That the right kind of social impact bond is sharing risk and return between the private and public sectors. And certainly Sir Ronald Cohen believes that that's an enormous potential move forward, that we could deploy capital at the scale of trillions of dollars to address social problems, and that would be a mechanism to do it. The other place I've seen is the, but I'm guessing that Terry knows about this, is the Irish Dairy Association, which has done some really interesting and radical rethinking of the relationship between farmers and regulation in Ireland in a way to make the industry more sustainable. So that's just one example I happen to come across. But otherwise, I really applaud what you're doing. It's clearly the pathway forward.
Go. Great. So I'm looking that I'm just going to make sure we haven't missed anyone, and I know Natalie's doing the same thing. I'll just, because I've got a couple of little things to add. There we go. I'll pick one from John again that he sent me earlier as an extra, and then on page 263 to be exact, you reference the starfish thrower. What do you do that falls into that category of? And I hope everybody knows it. Maybe you'll tell the story first, and then.
So here's the story, if I remember it right. Two friends are walking on a beach, and there have been a huge number of starfish washed up onto the beach. So as far as the eye can see, there are thousands and thousands of starfish lying in the sun, and they're going to die. And one member of the pair starts picking up the starfish and saying, and throwing them back into the sea, one by one. And his companion says to him, "Why are you doing that? You're never going to make a difference to these thousands of starfish. I mean, what are you thinking?" And his friend keeps slowly throwing the starfish back. And what she says is, "Well, I'm making a difference to this one." And
That's beautiful.
I think, I mean, it's an old story. I told it because I think, you know, and I think I say this in the book, I think we're in a desperate place. I really do. The world is going sideways very fast. The pandemic does not help, makes us all poorer and in some ways more afraid. And sometimes it's hard. It's hard to keep the faith. It's hard to get up and keep going. And so I think focusing on the difference we make right here, right now, is really important. And if the question is, what do I do, John, that fits into starfish throwing? Yeah. Well, since the book came out, I have been doing 10 to 15 events a week. So that's 6 months of 10 to 15 events a week. I'm going to stop because I can't keep doing it personally. And I have a day job and my colleagues are starting to get annoyed. But to me, it's all starfish throwing, because do I think that my book and my talks will change the world? Of course not. There are 7 billion people on the planet. And, you know, all of us have to shift if we're going to make a difference. But I keep thinking, well, you know, maybe someone I talk to will be inspired. Maybe someone I talk to will think about things differently. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm throwing starfish. And, you know, I have friends who say, you know, Rebecca, it's all the workings of history. You know, why are you single-handedly trying to change the world? That doesn't work for me either. I think one needs to make a personal effort. Both because I think if we do nothing, nothing will change. And because doing nothing from personal experience makes me really, really unhappy. So.
Good.
That's what's going on here.
No, I thank you for us being a starfish. I'm going to finish with Mark's question. I think there's some great, again, there are great comments and that I encourage everybody to read. But Mark's saying, Rebecca, your book came out just before the pandemic broke. Is there anything you would change or add to it based on?
Oh, Mark, thank you for asking. There are two things I would change. The book would be more radical and more personal if it came out knowing what we know now. The world has really shifted in the last 6 months. I'm saying things in forums that I never expected to say. People are much more open to more radical ideas, like government is part of the solution and you have to stop funding this junk. You know, that's in the book, but it's the last chapter and it's carefully written, and I would be much more aggressive now. The second thing I would do is talk more about race and exclusion. It's in the book, but I would make it more central to the conversation. Mm-hmm. Many of the young people I work with say, isn't racism endemic to capitalism? To get rid of racism, don't we have to get rid of capitalism? I do not believe that to be the case, but I would explicitly address that in the book. And the question of whether and how we build a world that treats all people with justice and respect, regardless of who they are or where they come from and how different they are.
Thank you. I think we're going to stop there. And normally we ask everybody to turn their microphones on in a minute and then say goodbye. So just we get that sense, because it's just been your voice and mine. And I'm really aware of that. Apart from thank you for being so active in the chat, everyone, as always. And I'm just going to pick up a quote that you put in the book, a very basic one that I thought was beautiful to end any session with, which was about taking care of yourself and finding joy. And on a personal note, thank you for writing that book. And I said it earlier, that having that personal piece and taking the stance and to say take care of yourself and find joy in a book that you have just said is for managers of Western companies, is actually more radical than you think, I believe. But I think it's beautiful, and that it's a great message to end on. So 2 minutes before an hour and a half. Thank you for incredible thought and for your work, and look forward to seeing you in person soon, hopefully, fingers crossed. And thank you everyone for this. I hope everybody will just switch off on their microphones and just say goodbye.
So just before that, can I say thank you for everything that you do? My guess is everyone on this call is working this and working it really hard. And one of the best bits of doing these events has been getting a sense of how many thousands of people there are throwing themselves against these problems. So thank you very, very much.